Well, is there a crisis of confidence? To talk about that, I'm joined here at the big table by Julius von der Laar. He was a member of the 2008 and 2012 Obama campaigns. He just returned from Iowa. Julius, it's good to see you again. And we're joined by our very own correspondent, Pablo Elias, in Washington. Hello to you, Pablo. Julius, I'm going to talk with you first. You were just in Iowa. Did you hear anyone connected with the campaign teams there voicing any concerns or worries about the caucuses not running as they should?
Everyone was anxious about the caucuses, and everyone knew that it was a new system in place, that there's also not one number to be reported, but three numbers for the first time, because the Democratic Party changed the caucus rules after the debacle of 2016, where there was some delay as well in reporting those numbers. So everyone was anxious, but nobody anticipated that there would be that much of a difficulty getting those numbers today.
Were you surprised to see what happened?
I was surprised because, again, Iowa is supposed to be this moment where there's great clarity and where there's one coming out or two coming out with tremendous momentum. And again, all those candidates on campaigns who worked incredibly hard to generate that momentum, I mean, they were just stopped in their tracks today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a shock for the entire world. I mean, this is definitely a crisis for Democrats in Iowa and Republicans, especially President Donald Trump. They have not refrained from trying to make political capital out of this. Today, Trump tweeted, and let me read that for you, the Democrat caucus is an unmitigated disaster. Nothing works, just like they ran the country. Remember the $5 billion Obamacare website that should have cost just 2% of that. The only person that can claim a very big victory in Iowa last night is Trump. No big surprise there, Pablo. I mean, the tweet from the U.S. president, it speaks to the fact that this is not just a problem for the Democrats, is it?
No, you're absolutely right. It's not just Democrats, of course, in Iowa. Julius just touched on it there. Of course, there's no front-runner now for the Democrats as they go into the primaries in New Hampshire. And we also need to bring in the fact that Trump's approval ratings are at their highest they've been in 3 years. And, you know, what normally happens in Iowa is that the Democrats could see off, or at least that's what was being commented here, with the weaker candidates. And, of course, we find ourselves now that those weaker candidates are now finding themselves in the primaries, like I said, in New Hampshire. And considering all the problems as well with the app, you know, there is talk now that Nevada, in fact, has said, which also has a caucus, they said that they're not going to use this app. So it's not something that is particularly favourable to the Democrats here in the United States, in considering a lot of the pressure that they've been under recently as well with regards to the impeachment here in the United States.
You know, Pablo, there have been commentaries today in the U.S. about the Iowa caucus crisis being the end of American democracy. You know, people asking, how could this happen after the warnings that followed the election in 2016? Have you heard questions being posed about the credibility and the integrity of the U.S. election system?
Well, it's something that I've definitely heard time and time again, and you read it time and time again about the credibility of the democratic system here in the United States. And, you know, if we start off small, we don't even have to go that far back. In fact, today, Joe Biden, the former vice president, who we must stress in the days leading up to this caucus in Iowa, looked like he wasn't going to perform as well as perhaps he had hoped. Well, his communications director came out saying that their campaign had some real concerns about the integrity of the process. Like that, they are very strong words. And then, of course, there's been a lot of debate in the United States over the system in general. You know, if we go back to the 2016 election, in fact, in the number of votes, President Trump, if it came down to that, didn't actually win in that sense. Now, of course, the Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton had a few million more votes than President Trump. But, of course, you know, it's spilt milk at this stage. And since then, we've had the Russia inquiry, we've had the impeachment of President Trump over this Ukraine scandal. So obviously all these elements are feeding into, you know, plenty of discussion, plenty of dialogue here in the United States over the democratic system in general.
Yeah, you could say that. Julius, I'm going to get you in just a second, but I want to take us back to November 2016 for a moment. On the evening before Election Day, I spoke with Ambassador Audrey Glover. Now, she led the OSCE's election observation team in the United States. We discussed one of the major difficulties that the U.S. faces when it holds an election. Take a listen. Every state basically has its own electoral system. Aren't you really observing almost 50 mini countries at once when you observe a national U.S. election?
Yes, you're right. We've been saying that quite a lot recently because, as you so rightly say, every state, even every county, has its own law. And we have been watching very carefully what's been going on, but we've also been making a lot of inquiries as to where our teams can go and observe and where they can't, because we certainly don't want to cause any problems and create any trouble locally. So we have spent a lot of time and trouble, and that has really made us realise that we are, as you correctly say, in effect watching 50 different elections here, plus that of DC as well.
Yeah, we tried to get in touch with the OSCE again for the mission to the U.S. Unfortunately, we didn't have any success tonight. Julius, you've canvassed the U.S. when you worked on the Obama campaign. Did you think even then that there's just too many electoral systems here?
I mean, you go from state to state, and every time the rules change. There are different rules during the primaries in Ohio than in South Carolina. There's completely different rules in the general election, so you got to adapt to that, right? The caucus system is entirely different from the primary system. I mean, take this moment, what transpired yesterday in Iowa, and compare it to the 2000 Al Gore versus George W. Bush situation. Right. And so it is a question of election interference from abroad. Russian situation that we talked about many times on the show. It is a question of whether the reporting actually takes place. I would probably argue that the Iowa caucus system has been flawed for many years. And this is just the first time that people actually see that the reporting is not 100% accurate because we have the digital footprint as well. So again, I think the Democratic Party in Iowa, I mean, they screwed up. I am very much optimistic that, you know, the candidates will recover from that, but that's definitely not the narrative you want coming out of this thing.
No, it is not. I mean, you talk with a lot of political players here in Europe. Right. Do you see warnings in Iowa for democracies here in Europe?
I see Iowa primarily an antiquated system that the state parties screwed up. You know, this has nothing to do with election interference, at least from what we've heard so far. Right. Let's see and wait how this plays out. But again, we have a completely different system in most European countries, at least. So I have some confidence left in our system.
And you do have better voter turnout here in Europe than we do in the United States.
Most certainly. Most importantly, during a caucus like that.
Especially during the caucus. We wanted to talk about that. Compared to Western Europe, the turnout in the United States is rather anemic. The OECD reports that the average turnout in Sweden, Austria, and Italy is at near 80%. The turnout in 2016 was the lowest in 2 decades at 55%. Now, I want you to consider Iowa. In 2016, turnout for the Iowa caucus was a tiny 15.7%. 15%. 1 week later, in New Hampshire, the turnout for the state's primary was 52%. That's a huge difference between caucus and primary in just 1 week. And these statistics, they are being used now in the case against caucuses. Pablo, that brings me to this question. Could 2020 be the last year of the Iowa caucuses?
Well, certainly this is not helping its continuity, we'll say. Obviously, the amount of pressure that's on now the Iowa Democratic Party is perhaps an indication of what is to come. And there has been a lot of calls today, even with just reading the media here in the United States, Democrats, commentators saying that perhaps it's time to change this system. And also the fact as well that the use of this app and this technology, which was essentially to make it more simple and also more transparent in some ways, has backfired. So it's not a particularly good day for the Democrats in that state, and it'll be interesting to see what the reaction is now going forward, whether we will see some change, but it could well be coming.
And Pablo, let's talk about the other major political event in the United States. Tomorrow, the impeachment trial of U.S. President Trump will end. The U.S. Senate is expected to acquit him. When you hear Republican members of the Senate saying that Trump is guilty of abuse of power, his behavior is shameful, yet they say they will not vote to convict. How do you begin to explain this to a global audience that we have?
Well, it's always very difficult to explain those situations because, you know, at the end of the day, you do have to step back and analyse it and not look at it so, you know, black and white. What are the reasons for this? Who are their electorate? Why are they defending the president in these situations? And, you know, there's one word which you hear time and time again here in the United States, which is unity. And also, even just today, ahead of the State of the Union this evening, senior Republicans are talking about this word of unity, bringing the country together, talking about the positives, not focusing on the negatives, and how it could lead, the impeachment of President Trump would lead to, you know, a period of great instability at a time when the country is so divided. So this is what I sort of try and focus on. I try to step back and try and understand the reasoning behind it, and also, exactly like I said, with regards to who the electorate is here and what is exactly, who are they sending this message out to.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Julius, you're a campaign consultant. I mean, how do you explain U.S. democracy when you've got impeachment going on, and the impeachment process, it seems, does not work because you have senators who admit that the president is guilty as charged, and yet they're going to deliver a verdict with the message, it doesn't matter what the president did?
I think it comes down to raw political power, right? I mean, you have senators like Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, who says exactly what you just mentioned. And you just got to take a look at the dynamic of electoral processes. There's one senator, Mitt Romney, who, of course, ran against President Obama in 2012. Right? He voted with the Democrats in the sense, at least, that some of the witnesses should be called. Why? Well, because he's in a Republican state that he won by 20 points, Utah, and where he has a stronghold and doesn't come up for re-election in another 4 years. So he's pretty safe in his district and in his state.
So he's not risking anything.
He's not risking anything. And all the other Republicans, I mean, they're looking at it from, again, a pure raw political process, saying, if I go up against the president, he's going to primary me, I'm going to lose my Senate seat, and I can go and find something else to do. And so I think that's the calculus. Right?
Who's afraid of the U.S. president? That could be the title for a new novel, I guess.
The answer is pretty much everyone in Congress on the Republican side.
On the Republican side. Julius von der Laar here at the big table. Julius, as always, we appreciate your insights. Pablo Elias in Washington. Pablo, thank you for helping us understand this story. Gentlemen, thank you.